The village of Oakaven burned beneath a sky the color of bruised plums. The raiders had come with the dawn, their long ships cutting through the morning mist like knives through silk, and by the time the sun had cleared the tree line, the fighting was over. The men of Oakaven lay in the mud, their swords still in their hands, their eyes still open. The women and children huddled in the church, their prayers rising to a God who seemed on this day to be listening to other voices. And the Viking called Ivar the Quiet stood in the center of the carnage, his axe dripping blood onto the frost-covered grass, and felt nothing at all. He had been fighting for 20 years. He had lost count of the villages, the battles, the faces of the men he had killed. They blurred together after a while, a river of blood that flowed from one season to the next, one raid to the next, one winter to the next. He did not fight for glory. He did not fight for gold. He fought because it was all he knew how to do, because the North had carved him into a weapon, and weapons did not ask why. But on this morning in this village, something happened that Ivar did not expect. He had kicked in the door of a small house at the edge of the square, expecting to find someone hiding, someone to kill, someone to drag back to the ships. Instead, he found a boy, a young man, really, perhaps 19 winters old, dressed in the torn remnants of a Saxon soldier's tunic. He was kneeling on the dirt floor, his hands clasped in front of him, his lips moving in a prayer that Ivar recognized. He had heard that prayer before, in another life, from the lips of a woman who had told him that the gods of the North were not the only ones who listened. The boy looked up, and his eyes met Ivar's. They were brown, soft, filled with a terror so complete that it seemed to fill the room like smoke. His hands were shaking, his breath coming in short, ragged gasps, and on his cheek was a fresh wound, still bleeding, still pink with the rawness of exposed flesh. He was going to die. He knew it. Ivar knew it. There was no reason for him to live, no reason for any of them to live, not in a world where the strong took what they wanted and the weak begged for mercy that never came. Ivar raised his axe. The boy closed his eyes, and then something happened. Ivar saw something in the boy's face, in the curve of his jaw, in the way his brow furrowed when he was afraid. It was a ghost that had been haunting Ivar for 7 years, ever since the day he had returned to his village to find his wife and his son dead on the floor of their own home, killed by the very men he had called his brothers. His son Eric had been 10 winters old. He had had brown eyes, soft eyes, the same shade as the boy kneeling before him. And when he was afraid, he had furrowed his brow in exactly the same way. Ivar lowered his axe. The boy opened his eyes, and his lips parted in surprise. He had expected to die. He had made peace with it. But the blow had not come, and the Viking with the gray eyes and the scarred face was looking at him as if he was seeing something else entirely. "What is your name?" Ivar asked. His voice was rough, broken by years of disuse, and the sword that had cut across his throat when he was young. But the words were clear enough. The boy swallowed. "Leofric," he whispered. Ivar nodded slowly. He reached down, gripped the boy's arm, and pulled him to his feet. Leofric was trembling so badly that he could barely stand, but Ivar held him steady, his massive hand wrapped around the boy's thin bicep. "Do you have a mother, Leofric?" Ivar asked. Leofric's eyes filled with tears. "She is dead," he said. "She died last winter. The fever." Ivar felt something crack open in his chest. He had not asked the question because he expected a different answer. He had asked it because he needed to hear the words. He needed to remind himself that the boy was not his son, that his son was dead, that no amount of mercy could bring back the dead. "Go," Ivar said. "Find somewhere to hide. Do not come out until the ships have gone." Leofric stared at him, his mouth open. "Why?" he asked. "Why are you letting me live?" Ivar looked at him for a long moment. Then he said, "Because you look at me the way my son used to look at me, before he died. Now go, before I change my mind." Leofric ran. He ran out the door, across the square, and disappeared into the smoke and the chaos. Ivar watched him go, his axe hanging at his side, and when he turned back to the burning village, he knew that the other warriors had seen. They had seen him spare the boy. They had seen him show mercy, and they would have questions. The journey back to the north took 2 weeks. The longship cut through the grey waters of the North Sea, its oars dipping and rising in a rhythm that Ivar had known since childhood. But this time, the rhythm did not comfort him. He sat at the prow of the ship, his back to the other warriors, his eyes fixed on the horizon. He did not eat, he did not drink, he did not speak. The other warriors kept their distance. They had seen him spare the boy, and they did not understand. In their world, mercy was weakness. Mercy was a disease that spread from man to man, softening them, making them vulnerable. A Viking who spared his enemy was a Viking who could not be trusted, and so they whispered among themselves, and they looked at Ivar with eyes that were no longer filled with respect. On the 5th night, Leofric was brought to the ship. He was not the only prisoner. There were a dozen others, men and women from Oakaven, their hands bound, their faces blank with shock. But Leofric was different. He was the one Ivar had spared, and the other warriors wanted to know why. Ivar did not answer their questions. He simply stood at the prow, his back to them, and listened to the sound of the waves. But when night fell and the crew slept, he made his way to the hold where the prisoners were kept. Leofric was huddled in the corner, his wrists raw from the ropes, his eyes red from weeping. Ivar crouched beside him and cut the ropes. Leofric stared at him, his breath catching in his throat. "Do not run," Ivar said quietly. "There is nowhere to run. The sea will kill you before I do." Leofric nodded, his eyes wide. Ivar sat back against the hull, his massive frame blocking the narrow passage, and for a long time he said nothing. The ship creaked and groaned, and the water whispered against the wood, and somewhere above them, a warrior snored. "Why did you spare me?" Leofric asked again, his voice barely a whisper. Ivar looked at him, and in the dim light of the lantern, his gray eyes seemed almost human. "I had a son," he said. "His name was Eric. He was 10 winters old when he died. He had your eyes, your face, the way you furrow your brow when you are afraid." He paused, and his voice dropped lower. "I was away when the raiders came. I was fighting for my Jarl, killing for my Jarl, dying for my Jarl. And when I returned, my wife and my son were dead. Their throats had been cut. Their bodies had been left for the crows. I killed the men who did it. I killed them slowly, but it did not bring them back." Leofric listened, his eyes fixed on Ivar's face. He had been taught that the Vikings were monsters, that they had no families, no love, no grief. But the man sitting before him was not a monster. He was a father who had lost his son. "I have been searching for him ever since," Ivar continued. "Not his body, his face, his eyes. I see him in the faces of young men I am supposed to kill. I see him in the way they beg, the way they cry, the way they pray to gods I do not believe in. And sometimes, when the light is right, I cannot raise my axe. I cannot kill the ghost of my own son." Leofric felt tears slide down his cheeks. He did not wipe them away. "I am sorry," he said. "I am sorry that you lost him." Ivar nodded slowly. "So am I," he said, "but sorry does not bring back the dead. Sorry does not fill the hole in my chest. Sorry is just a word." They sat in silence for a long time, the Viking and the prisoner, and when dawn broke over the horizon, Ivar stood and walked back to the prow. He did not look back. But Leofric watched him go, and he understood that something had passed between them. Something that was not friendship, not forgiveness, but a kind of recognition, a kind of understanding. Jotunheim was the same as it had always been. Cold, gray, carved into the side of the mountain like a wound in the earth. The great hall was filled with the smoke of the central fire and the noise of warriors drinking and boasting and telling stories of the raid. Ivar stood at the edge of the hall, waiting for Jarl Harald to call him forward. Harald sat on his throne of whalebone, his silver hair gleaming in the firelight, his pale eyes fixed on Ivar's face. He had heard about the boy. Everyone had heard. "Step forward, Ivar the Quiet," Harald said, and his voice was cold. "I am told you spared a prisoner. I am told you let him live when you should have killed him. I am told you showed mercy to the enemy." Ivar stepped forward, his head bowed. "It is true, my Jarl." The whole fell silent. Warriors turned to watch, their eyes gleaming with anticipation. They had seen Ivar fight. They had seen him kill. They had never seen him show mercy. "Why?" Harald asked. Ivar raised his head and met the Jarl's eyes. "Because he reminded me of my son." The silence deepened. Some of the warriors shifted uncomfortably. Others looked away. Harald studied Ivar's face for a long moment, and then he nodded slowly. "Your son has been dead for 7 years," Harald said. "I remember." I remember because you came to me with his blood on your hands and asked me to find the men who killed him. I remember because you killed them yourself, one by one, and you did not ask for help. You have been a good warrior, Ivar. You have been loyal. You have never questioned my orders. But this..." He gestured toward the door where Leofric stood with the other prisoners, his hands bound, his face pale. "This is weakness, and weakness spreads." "It is not weakness," Ivar said, and his voice was steady. "It is the only thing that keeps me from becoming a monster." Harold stared at him, and for a moment, something flickered in his cold eyes. Something that might have been respect, or pity, or something else entirely. "Very well," he said. "The boy is yours, he will be your thrall. He will eat what you eat, sleep where you sleep, and if he causes trouble, you will answer for it. Do you understand?" Ivar bowed his head. "I understand, my Jarl." Leofric was given to Ivar like a piece of meat, like a sword, like a shield. The other prisoners were taken to the slave quarters, but Leofric was led to Ivar's hut at the edge of the settlement. The hut was small, built of logs and turf, with a single room that held a bed of furs, a hearth, and a small wooden chest. On the wall, carved from driftwood, was a figure of a woman holding a child. Leofric stared at it, and Ivar saw the question in his eyes. "My wife," Ivar said quietly, "and my son. I carved it after they died. It is the only thing I have left of them." Leofric looked at the carving, then at Ivar. "You keep them with you." "Everywhere I go," Ivar said. "They are the reason I am still alive. They are the reason I have not let the cold take me." The weeks that followed were the strangest of Leofric's life. He had expected to be beaten, starved, treated like an animal. But Ivar did not beat him. He did not starve him. He did not even raise his voice. He gave Leofric food and water, a place to sleep, a cloak to keep him warm. He did not ask for anything in return. How? He did not even ask Leofric to work. On the third night, Leofric could not bear it any longer. "Why are you being kind to me?" he asked. "I am your enemy. I am your prisoner. I should be working in the fields or cleaning the stables or..." "You should be dead," Ivar interrupted. "But you are not. I spared you, and now you are mine, not because I own you, because I chose you. Do you understand the difference?" Leofric shook his head. "No." Ivar sighed, and for a moment, he looked older than his years. "In the north, we believe that every man has a fate. The Norns spin the threads of our lives, and we cannot escape what they have woven. I believe that the Norns brought you to me. I believe that you are here because I needed to find something I lost. Not my son. He is gone. But something else, something I cannot name." Leofric looked at the carving on the wall, at the woman and the child frozen in wood. "What if you are wrong?" he asked. "What if I am just a boy who happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time?" Ivar looked at him, and for the first time, his lips curved into something that was almost a smile. "Then you are still here," he said. "And that is enough." As the weeks turned into months, Leofric began to find his place in the settlement. He learned to speak the northern tongue, stumbling over the harsh consonants and the strange rhythms. He learned to fish in the fjord, to chop wood, to mend nets. He learned to read the runes that were carved into the stones at the edge of the settlement, the stories of the old gods and the heroes who had come before. But he also learned that the other warriors did not accept him. They looked at him with suspicion, with contempt, with a coldness that reminded him of the winter wind. They did not understand why Ivar had spared him, and they did not trust him. He was the enemy. He would always be the enemy. One night, a warrior named Gunnar cornered Leofric behind the great hall. Gunnar was broad and scarred, with a beard that hung to his chest and eyes that held no warmth. He had been watching Leofric for weeks, waiting for an opportunity. "You think you are special," Gunnar said, his voice low and dangerous. "You think Ivar spared you because you remind him of his dead son. But Ivar is a fool. And you are nothing, a thrall, a southerner, a worm." Leofric's heart pounded in his chest, but he did not run. He had learned that running only made the wolves chase harder. "Ivar is your brother," he said. "You should not speak of him that way." Gunnar laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Brother? He is no brother of mine. He's a man who cannot let go of the past. He's a man who cries over a wife who has been dead for 7 years. He's a man who treats a thrall like a son." He stepped closer, and Leofric could smell the meat on his breath. "I should kill you. Right now. And when Ivar asks, I will tell him you tried to escape." He reached for his knife and Leofric closed his eyes. The blow did not come. Leofric opened his eyes and saw Gunnar frozen in place, his arm raised, his face twisted in fury. And behind Gunnar, standing in the shadows, was Ivar. His grey eyes were cold, colder than Leofric had ever seen them, and in his hand was his axe. "Lower the knife," Ivar said, and his voice was quiet. Gunnar hesitated. Then he lowered his arm, and his knife clattered to the ground. "He is a thrall," Gunnar spat. "He means nothing. Why do you protect him?" Ivar stepped forward and Gunnar stepped back. "Because he is mine," Ivar said, "and because I have killed better men than you for less." He raised his axe, just enough for Gunnar to see the edge catch the firelight. "If you touch him again, I will not ask questions. I will not call for the Jarl. I will simply kill you, do you understand?" Gunnar's face went pale. He nodded, turned, and walked away into the darkness. Leofric stood there, his legs trembling, his heart still racing. Ivar lowered his axe and looked at him. "You should not have been out here alone," he said. "I did not think anyone would miss me," Leofric said. Ivar's expression softened just slightly. "I would have missed you," he said. Then he turned and walked back toward the hut, and Leofric followed him, his feet silent on the frozen ground. The winter passed, slow and dark, and the spring came, slow and grey. Leofric had been in Jotunheim for 6 months when the raiding season began again. Ivar would leave with the other warriors, sailing south to pillage and burn, and Leofric would stay behind, tending the hut, keeping the fire alive, waiting for his return. He did not know when he had started thinking of Ivar as something other than his captor. He did not know when the fear had turned into something else. Respect, perhaps, or gratitude, or something he did not have a name for. But he knew that when Ivar was gone, the settlement felt empty. The fire felt colder. The days felt longer. And then, on a raid in the summer, Ivar was wounded. They brought him back to Jotunheim on a stretcher, his tunic soaked with blood, his face pale as ash. An arrow had pierced his side just below the ribs, and the wound had festered on the journey home. The healers did what they could, but they shook their heads and whispered that he would not last the night. Leofric pushed through the crowd and knelt beside Ivar's bed. The Viking's eyes were closed, his breath shallow, his skin hot with fever. The wound was black at the edges, and the smell of rot filled the small room. "Let me try," Leofric said. The healers looked at him with disbelief. "You are a thrall," one of them said. "You know nothing of healing." "I know more than you think," Leofric said. His father had been a huntsman, a man who had learned to treat wounds in the wilderness, and he had taught Leofric everything he knew. "Give me 3 days. If he is not better by then, you can do what you want with me." Jarl Harald was cold. He stood in the doorway, his pale eyes studying Leofric's face. "You would risk your life for him?" he asked. Leofric looked at Ivar, at the man who had spared him, who had protected him, who had treated him like a son. "He risked his life for me," Leofric said. "The day we met, he could have killed me. He chose not to. Now it is my turn." Harald nodded slowly. 3 days, he said. "No more." Leofric worked through the night. He cleaned the wound with boiled water and honey, cut away the rotting flesh with a blade heated in the fire, and packed it with a poultice of yarrow and garlic that his father had taught him to make. He changed the bandages every few hours, forced water between Ivar's cracked lips, and sat beside him, talking to him, telling him stories of Oakaven, of his mother, of the spring festivals and the harvest dances. On the second night, Ivar's fever broke. He opened his eyes, and for a moment he did not know where he was. Then he saw Leofric, slumped in the chair beside his bed, his red-rimmed eyes fixed on his face. "You are still here," Ivar said, his voice a whisper. "Where else would I be?" Leofric asked. Ivar tried to smile, but the pain stopped him. "You could have run. You could have let me die." "I thought about it," Leofric admitted, "for about a second. Then I realized that I did not want to live in a world where you were not in it." Ivar stared at him, and something in his grey eyes shifted. Something softened. "You are not my son," he said. "You will never be my son, but you are something else, something I did not expect to find." "What is that?" Leofric asked. Ivar reached out and took his hand, his rough fingers wrapping around Leofric's slender ones. "My family," he said. "You are my family." Leofric felt tears slide down his cheeks, and he did not wipe them away. He had lost his mother, his village, his home. He had been taken from everything he had ever known. But he had found something new, something he had not been looking for, something he had not known he needed. When Ivar was well enough to walk again, he went to Jarl Harald and made a request. "I want to free him," Ivar said. "I want him to be a free man, not a thrall." Harald looked at him for a long moment. "You would give up your claim to him?" "I never had a claim," Ivar said. "He was never mine to own. He was mine to protect. And I have protected him. Now I want him to be free." Harald nodded slowly. "Very well, he is free, but he will always be your responsibility. If he causes trouble, you answer for it." Ivar bowed his head. "I understand." That night, Ivar and Leofric sat on the cliffs above the fjord watching the northern lights dance across the sky. The colors were like nothing Leofric had ever seen, green and purple and gold, shifting and swirling as if the heavens themselves were alive. "You are free now," Ivar said. "You can go home. You can go back to the south, find a new village, start a new life." Leofric looked at him, and in the light of the aurora, Ivar's face was softer than he had ever seen it. "I am home," Leofric said. "I have been home for a long time. I just did not know it." Ivar's lips curved into a smile, and for the first time, Leofric saw something in his eyes that was not grief. It was hope. "You would stay, here, in the cold, with the people who took everything from you?" Leofric looked out at the fjord, at the longhouses and the fishing boats and the children playing in the snow. He thought of his mother, dead from fever. He thought of his village, burned to the ground. He thought of the man sitting beside him, who had killed his comrades and spared his life, who had treated him like a son and given him a reason to live. "I would stay," Leofric said, "not because I have forgotten what happened, not because I forgive the men who burned my home, but because you are here, and you are the only family I have left." Ivar reached out and put his hand on Leofric's shoulder, and they sat together in the silence watching the lights dance across the sky. "I was wrong," Ivar said finally. "When I spared you, I thought I was seeing my son. I thought I was trying to bring him back, but I was not. I was seeing you, just you, a boy who was afraid, who had lost everything, who did not deserve to die, and I chose to let you live, not because of Eric, because of who you were." Leofric leaned into him, feeling the warmth of his massive body against the cold. "And I chose to stay," he said, "not because I had nowhere else to go, because I wanted to be here, with you." The northern lights faded, and the stars came out, and the sea whispered its ancient songs below. Ivar the Quiet, who had killed more men than he could count, who had lost everything he had ever loved, who had spent 7 years searching for a ghost, sat on the cliffs with the boy he had spared, and for the first time in a long time he felt at peace. He did not know what the future would bring. He did not know if the other warriors would ever accept Leofric, or if Leofric would ever truly belong in the north. But he knew one thing, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones and warmed him more than any fire ever could. He had not spared Leofric for a reason anyone else could understand. He had spared him because he was human, because he was afraid, because he deserved to live, and that was reason enough. The snow began to fall, soft and silent, dusting the cliffs and the fjord and the rooftops of the settlement below. Ivar pulled his cloak tighter around his shoulders. Leofric leaned into him, and together they watched the winter return to the land that had become their home. "Ivar," Leofric said quietly, "do you think the Norns brought us together?" Ivar was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "I do not know. I do not know if the Norns exist or if the gods exist or if there is any meaning to any of this, but I know that you are here, and I am here, and that is enough." Leofric smiled, and the smile reached his eyes. "Yes," he said, "it is enough." They sat on the cliffs until the stars began to fade, and the first light of dawn touched the horizon. The sea was calm, the wind was still, and for one brief moment the world was quiet. Ivar the Quiet, who had spent his life fighting, killing, surviving, closed his eyes and listened to the sound of the boy breathing beside him. He had spared an enemy. He had kept a promise he had not known he was making, and he had found something he had thought was lost forever. Not his son, not his wife, not the life he had once had, but something new, something precious, something worth living for. And that, he decided, was the only reason he would ever need.